Coming up tonight, the Harmony loses her crown. We find out how Central Park came to be, and we celebrate the very first Halloween on the high seas for this new ship. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day 9 of the cruise you've on board the Harmony of the Seas. Today was Monday, October 31st, 2016, Halloween. And that, of course, was our top story, and it'll be included throughout this episode as it did run the entire day with different events, and of course, as you can see around me, decorations throughout the Royal Promenade, as well as a few other small areas of the ship.
My very first cruise, I've never done this before. It's unbelievable.
Today, as for our location though, we are officially in the second half of the Atlantic Ocean now. Our noontime location was 27 degrees and 38 minutes north by 48 degrees and 57 minutes west. Closest land was Bermuda at that time. The weather today, the first absolutely beautiful day that we've had this sailing. We had a sunrise at 8:29 a.m. this morning. A little bit cloudy. Didn't really see a sunrise. But tonight at 7:35 p.m. we had the first actual sunset that you could see the sailing. There was some clouds. You couldn't see a green flash or anything because of the clouds in the way, but you could actually see the sunset in some colors, which we haven't been able to up to this point in this sailing. In between though, it was a beautiful day. We had very calm seas, pretty much flat seas the entire day. You can still see the ship rocking a little bit, but the ocean itself looked incredibly flat and smooth. It was just beautiful to look out upon. And we had a high of 79 degrees, so it was an absolutely warm day to be out on the pool deck, and a lot of people chose to do that as, for once, the forecast did not call for scattered thunderstorms, but instead was simply partly cloudy skies. And there was cloud cover around the ship, but for the most part it seemed like we had blue skies most of the day. There was also a very light wind blowing across the deck, nothing too major, so it was just an absolutely beautiful day to be up on the pool deck or in Central Park, anywhere outside for once. And of course, if you didn't feel like sitting around at a pool all day, you could do what was on the compass, and there were a few things scheduled today. So for today's compass summary, for me it started off at 9:30 this morning. I attended an entertainment tour in the Royal Theatre. This is one of those perks that's available to Diamond and Up members, and it was scheduled several times throughout the sailing. You were assigned to different days that you could attend that, and it just kind of gave you a little behind the scenes look at what's backstage and some of the props, as well as a little inside information on how the Royal Theatre works. Then at 2 o'clock today, we had the third and final of the captain's nautical notes sessions. This was the third of those sessions, but of course he still does have the actual captain's corner coming up. And today's nautical notes was on Harmony's ports of call. So the captain went through and explained every one of the ports that the Harmony has docked at in Europe, including the special ones that it docked at, such as Rotterdam and Southampton. And he also touched on some of the ones in the Caribbean, kind of going over what the different ports had to offer, as well as some inside information on how he had to navigate the various ports, some of the challenges each one offers, and what each one is like from the bridge perspective when it comes to actually making it to and docking at each of these locations.
And it's approximately 1 mile that we are backing, and then we look starboard side, alongside here. The reason for that is that we have very high winds here from time to time. It's called the Mistral.
So that was a little more interesting than the last one. I think the first one is still his best, but this one was certainly an interesting one if you have any interest in cruising or the harmony of the seas specifically. And then shortly after that, about an hour after that ended, at 4 p.m., there was a 3D movie in the Royal Theater as well. Today it was Miss Peregrine's School for Peculiar Children, and I did attend that. They've had a couple 3D movies, not too many, a lot less than I expected them to. I think maybe only 2 other ones so far, but there are a couple more scheduled coming up, and according to Abe today, he announced that on the possibly the last sea day that we have, the Trolls movie, which will premiere on land on that day, will actually premiere on the ship as well at the same time. So we'll have that coming up in this sailing to see in the theater for anyone that is interested. But that was a 2-hour movie, so that took us right up to 6 o'clock and the usual dinner time. So today was day 9, so another new menu, and the dress for today was casual, so another casual night as well. For me, it was a decent menu, a couple items, not one of the stellar starlight menus that we've seen throughout the sailing. So for my starter, I went with a classic one that I had already done before, and that was the French onion soup again. And then for my entree, I got one of the new ones that are included in this menu, the Yukon Gold potato gnocchi, which was delicious. It was kind of like a hybrid of the braised beef spaghetti dish that they do, as well as gnocchi, so it's a little bit different than we're used to, but it was still a very delicious dish. And then for dessert, I did the warm hazelnut chocolate cake, as well as coffee ice cream with hot fudge. Always remember, you can get ice cream or sorbet any day of the cruise in the dining room. Every day, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry are available, as well as there's usually a special flavor of the day each day that you can choose, which today was coffee ice cream. And while it lists just ice cream and they'll just give you a bowl of ice cream, you can also look through the menu at the other items that are on that night's desserts and pull anything you want from that and kind of make your own sundae. So for instance, tonight the warm hazelnut chocolate cake featured hot fudge. So I was able to get hot fudge on that ice cream, and there are a couple items they'll have even if it's not listed on the menu for that day, but at least if you see, like caramel or something on an item for that night, it's pretty safe that you'll be able to request that on your ice cream as well. And then throughout the day they had items like signing up for tonight's costume contest and a Halloween scavenger hunt, some Halloween trivia, Halloween lectures, all sorts of Halloween events, and of course the decorations around the ship, especially the promenade, which was the heart of the Halloween festivities. Tonight from 7:30 to 9 o'clock they had a haunted house in the on-air club. Looked like it was mainly the cruise director staff and some of the entertainment staff took over the on-air club, turned it into a haunted house. They dropped some curtains and other items to really divide the venue up into a whole bunch of small rooms, and you went through different little scenes, and throughout the night you could always hear some screaming out of there, so it certainly did scare some people. So that ran from 7:30 to 9 o'clock tonight, and that was full the entire time, almost the entire length that they were running it. The line ran from the on-air club all the way down past the elevators, across to the other side of the ship, and down the promenade deck outside. So it was a very popular event that everyone wanted to go into and check out. And it was a continuously rolling one. You walked through it the whole time, so it was a continuously moving line, yet it was still a lengthy line, but it only took roughly 15 minutes to get through that line and into the haunted house. And then once inside, it was about 5 or so minutes to get through. And then at 10 o'clock, the official Halloween party festivities started to begin with Legend, a tribute to Michael Jackson, which featured Tino, the activities manager, doing his impersonation of Michael Jackson, along with a couple other members of the activities staff, doing a whole series of songs for Michael Jackson. And of course, on every sailing, they feature the Thriller dance, where you can learn how to do that, and that was the finale to the Legend tribute to Michael Jackson tonight. And then as soon as that ended, things immediately transitioned into the official Halloween party titled Spooktacular Halloween Party, and that took over the Royal Promenade, featuring live band up on Deck 6, and everybody for the most part on Deck 5 and around Deck 6 as well. A lot of dancing and some special Halloween lighting to the Royal Promenade, but the big festivity really was about 15 minutes later. At 10:45 was the Spooktacular Halloween Parade costume contest, in which 265 guests signed up to basically parade across the catwalk and show off their Halloween costumes, as Abe, the cruise director, kind of commentated the whole thing, and several members of the entertainment staff from different shows like 1887 and Grease sort of judged the different costumes. And that took nearly an hour to actually go through all the costumes, because there were 265 guests, so that was a very lengthy little piece that went until about 11:30. And then that left a half hour for the band to come back out and continue playing and dancing and continue that party for one more half hour until midnight, when the official results of the Halloween costume contest were announced, and the ultimate finale of the Halloween party occurred with the dropping of all the balloons down onto the Royal Promenade, which basically turned into a period of about 5 minutes of constant balloon popping, as everyone immediately started popping those balloons when they dropped. But once that was kind of underway, the band continued playing, and they continued playing for roughly another hour until about 1 a.m. and kind of finished off the party. For the most part, it was packed all the way through the costume parade. Once that ended, it seemed like a lot of people kind of faded away, and by the time the balloons dropped, there was enough room to kind of have some breathing room and move around the promenade, which wasn't the case earlier. And then, of course, after the balloon drop, it pretty much emptied out. There weren't too many people left by the end of the entire festivity. But the one thing that was left behind was a huge mess. Probably the messiest I've ever seen a Royal Promenade, with all those balloons popped all over the place. But already it is now 3 a.m. and about an hour ago at 2 a.m. it was already fully cleaned up, and everything's kind of back to normal on the promenade. All of that stuff has been cleaned up, and they're currently cleaning all of the Halloween decorations up around the deck, as well as tomorrow is November 1st, and like everything on a cruise ship, one day it's not there, the next day it appears, and the next day it's already gone. So by tomorrow, I'm sure all these decorations, even in here, which is the Boot and Bonnet pub, will all be gone by tomorrow. So that about wrapped today up. It is 3 a.m., which technically I guess is 2 a.m. because we do have another time change tonight. We do roll the clocks back one more time tonight, and there will likely be, I think, one or two more going forward. Last night we did not change the clocks at all. It was a little break in that after doing it several days in a row, but tonight we are once again changing those clocks. And that is pretty much the end of the night. That's usually scheduled for once things are all wrapped up. So that does it for our compass summary on this Halloween day on board the Harmony of the Seas. And for tonight's venue tour, we're going to take a look at an area of the ship that is changed a lot since the last time this ship set sail. When the Oasis set sail, she had a Windjammer, she had a Viking Crown Lounge. On board the Harmony of the Seas, the Windjammer has been changed a bit to match a lot of the styling of the Quantum class, and in my opinion to be much better laid out, more efficient than the previous ones, while the Viking Crown Lounge has now become the Suite Lounge. So today we're going to take a look at that reimagined crown on board the Harmony of the Seas. The Viking Crown has been the signature of all Royal Caribbean ships since the beginning. This large iconic venue that can be spotted from miles away is often home to a variety of lounges, bars, and even nightclubs. The Oasis class took this feature to a size never seen before with the relocation of the Windjammer and the addition of loft suites. With the Quantum class, this iconic feature was for the first time left out of the design. With the Harmony of the Seas following that, the iconic structure still exists as it did on its sisters before it, but internally the space is no longer what it once was. The large Crown Lounge has been removed. In its place is a new Suite Lounge that takes advantage of the convenient location on the same deck as the loft suites. This space allows the suite guests to get complimentary drinks as well as just have a quiet place to relax throughout the day. The space plays double duty though as the home of Coastal Kitchen, the suite exclusive dining venue as well. This California-inspired dining venue offers the usual complimentary breakfast offerings, as well as a set dinner menu that suite guests can opt to enjoy on any night of the sailing. On the first level of the Viking Crown, just like its sisters, you'll find the large Windjammer marketplace. This venue has been upgraded with the enhancements from the Quantum class, such as the integration of a hand-washing station by the entrance, and a multitude of islands along either side, with a large made-to-order grilling station in the back. Even its color palette more closely resembles the Quantum class than her sisters. Just like any other ship though, it's still the classic Windjammer buffet, offering breakfast, lunch, and dinner daily for guests to enjoy. In the forward center of the Viking Crown, you'll find the top of the aft atrium and its lobbies on each level. With Harmony, much of the focus has been on improving passenger flow, and this is more visible here than anywhere with the addition of more large staircases and intentional guest flow to and from the Windjammer. While the Viking Crown Lounge may be no more, the Viking Crown is still very much a presence overlooking the ship. And if you spend some time walking around it, just like can be found in her sisters, you'll find a way to look down on Harmony yourself. So the changing of that crown obviously means that's one more great place to look out at the sea that is no longer available, and unfortunately that's probably the biggest issue the Harmony has. There really aren't many places you can actually go to look out at the sea because it is such an internal facing ship, and unfortunately with that Suite Lounge there, majority of the guests can't use that, which is probably the best sea views you have on the entire ship. And really one of the few places you can actually look forward for 270 degrees. And if you're ever up in there or up in the Windjammer in that lobby area, you can of course look straight down onto Central Park. And today our interview is with the man responsible for Central Park. He is the Harmony of the Seas landscape specialist, Laszlo Turos. So today I'm in Central Park and I'm joined by Laszlo, who is the landscape specialist on board the Harmony of the Seas. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you there.
So could you provide a little bit of a background on how you got your start in agriculture?
Yeah, I was born in Hungary and I graduated from the University of Agricultural Sciences. I have a master's degree in plant breeding. And moving to the States, I got engaged in the landscaping industry in South Florida. And I worked there for 16 years, designing, installation, management, for residential and homeowners also. I had many years of experience working with tropical plants before coming to working on a ship.
Yeah. So landscaping on land is obviously normal. On a ship, it's a bit different. How did you get connected with Royal Caribbean?
Well, it was an accident actually. I found it browsing on the internet, and I applied on a company's website, and very shortly they called me up, and after a few interviews I've become the part of the project management team, and ever since I've been with them. This is my 8th year with the Royal Caribbean.
So the very first one was on the Oasis of the Seas. That was about 7 years ago now. That was the first time anything like this had ever been done. What kind of planning and testing had to go into that?
Well, it was a long period of time, even before the conceiving Central Park. They were contemplating about designing new features for these new class of ships, the Oasis class. And they actually at one point ended up with this huge space in the middle of the ship that become the roof for Royal Promenade, which is below us on deck 5. We are on deck 8, and they decided to landscape it. The first idea was rolling hills of grass with some landscaping, very much an open area where guests could walk freely. But after experimenting, they made actually a mock-up version of the grass idea, and they figured out they would recuperate from so many people walking on it, but not in here, because we simply don't have enough light. It's mostly shady, semi-shady area in the park, so grass wouldn't live. So they went for tropical garden that you can see here today, even on Harmony. And that's how it happened gradually.
Yeah. And then with the Harmony of the Seas, obviously there's been about 7 years of development time between Oasis and now. What kind of changes in progress has been made?
Yes, we made a few changes. It's not exactly a carbon copy of the previous 2 ships. The planters are very much the same. They are in the same location. It's very much the same material. However, structurally, you may see them lower. The walls are not as high. We changed the trellis bar. Some of the small planters disappear. The bar become bigger. Also, the vertical garden that we call the living wall is a different concept versus the first 2 ships. It's more of a contemporary design. It's more like art. It has a pattern and with lesser plants, but a well thought out design.
And then with the Harmony of the Seas, the Central Park was installed at the shipyard. Oasis and Allure were not installed until they were in port. How did that change the setup process?
Well, it was good and bad. The bad part was it happened early on, first second week of May, and it was quite cold in France, where Harmony was built, and some of the plants suffered. We even lost some of the plants, so we had to replant them. However, we were able to acquire the right material. The plants come from 2 locations. The trees and the vines were shipped from Florida, and the understory planting and the vertical gardens came from Holland. There was quite a difference. We also had a little more time because the ship was still in the yard, so we were not in operation. With the first 2 ships, especially with Oasis, it was really stressing. The ship was ready for guests when we arrived in Port Everglades, in Fort Lauderdale from the shipyard, and the only part of the ship was Central Park not completed, and we had a very short time to make it happen.
And then you've got a park on a ship which is entirely made of steel and different forms of metal. So how do you handle the irrigation and the water disbursement throughout the park?
We have an automated irrigation system that's controlled by a clock. It's a complex irrigation controller. I program it to weather and seasonal conditions. We have different types of emitters. Some are irrigated by drip irrigation. Some have like spraying heads. When they come on, you can see a 180 umbrella head or a 360 that will cover the areas. Also for the trees, we have some bubblers, and we have an entirely independent irrigation system for the living walls. And we can also feed in liquid fertilizer in our system, so they can get the plant food through the irrigation water.
And then the first two ships were based in the Caribbean. They had seasons in Europe, and Harmony, of course, started with a season in Europe. What kind of changes have to be done for Europe versus the Caribbean?
Well, actually, the park was designed as a tropical garden already, so despite of the cold early spring weeks, it fared really well. And in the Mediterranean, we have similar temperatures, not as hot as in the Caribbean, maybe definitely not as humid, but the plants did very well. And it was a surprise, somewhat of a concern, because we have never done it before. That's the first time we do a summer season starting in Europe, but it turned out to be a success.
So this is obviously a complex park. There's a lot of moving parts involved. Has there been anything that you've tried to do that hasn't been able to work?
Yes, it really starts with Oasis. It was designed by a landscape architect, and they tried the best to bring in some interesting species and a variety of plants. And we quickly learned that some of these plants just don't like it at sea. Sometimes we can explain it, sometimes there's no logical explanation, it just doesn't work. These plants are not in their natural habitat. Many of them are grown through coastal areas, even native to those countries that we visit, definitely subtropical Florida. That is not as much of a concern, but many of the shade tolerant plants tend to burn when directly exposed to the sun, and those plants had to be changed. And that took us with a different plant selection for the second ship, Allure of the Seas, that came out precisely 1 year later after Oasis. That was about 30% different in the design as in the plant material. And of course we had some limitations in Europe. It's really hard to buy certain tropical plants in large quantities, so that kind of constricted us for certain species. But looks like we have a good selection of plants. We may change a few later, and we may bring in some more color, but it's definitely a wonderful situation right now.
And has there been anything that you've tried that you weren't sure would succeed but were surprised just how well it turned out?
Yes, actually we did a lot of experimenting. I have my favorite plants, and I try to bring them in. Sometimes it ended up in failure. Some of the plants just survived, but they didn't want to flower. They were just happy plants, but without any flowers. So that was interesting to see. So we tried many different things, and some ended up in failure. We tried something else. It was very difficult with the vertical gardens in the beginning. We lost quite a few plants, and we learned that some of these plants just don't take the sea conditions. It's really windy. We have different things coming in, a lot of salt deposit, chlorinated water from the pool, high exposure to strong winds. So we had to find the tough plants that can actually take this environment.
And then this is obviously transatlantic. There's a lot of different conditions, oftentimes a little worse conditions that can happen during a transatlantic. So what kind of preparations have you had to do before we started on this voyage?
Well, we are exposed to the elements, so there was no preparation for this crossing. the worst thing that can happen to us is actually not cold temperature, but cold winds. High winds with cold temperature. So far, so good. We're kind of in the middle of the trip, and hopefully it will stay this way. It doesn't get much more rough than we experienced a few days ago. We lost many leaves. You could see leaves on the floor, even flowers that we had to sweep up. We don't have any unconceivable damage yet.
And then with a ship, there's obviously all kinds of bad weather that comes along. So what is the maximum conditions this park could really withstand?
Well, even in hurricane force winds, it's basically a pit in the middle of the ship. So we kind of protect it as opposed to the upper decks, like the pool deck. And we have a very unique air circulation in Central Park. And part of the design, structural in the ship, not solely for Central Park, but for all the open decks, we have a wind deflector in the forward, and right above us, where we're standing right now, above this mid-bridge, there's a structure that will further deflect the airflow above the ship. And in the aft section, there's a ledge made of glass that will prevent the wind swirling down in Central Park. These are features we're designing, wind tunnels, and improved after Allure and Oasis. Harmony has a little bit more, even more wind protection than the first two ships.
Yeah. And then Oasis and Allure both came over to Europe to go into a dry dock. You're continuously making changes to Central Park, but what bigger changes or additional options are available to you when making a dry dock?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We had to learn that in 2014 when we first dried up Oasis of the Seas, and that happened in Rotterdam in the first 3 weeks of October in the Netherlands. And we had to make preparation for that because it was too cold for comfort, a long period of time of expected cold weather. So we replaced about 80% of the plant material in Central Park with species that we hope would survive and take the colder climate. And after dried up, we reverted back to the original look. So it was twice re-landscaping just for the sake of the European trip for the dried up. Yeah. And we learned the aspects of logistics and learned about plants, what really works, what wasn't really a good choice. Now we have a grab on it. We can be prepared for a situation like that. Again, it happened with Allure also, but they went later on the spring. I believe it happened in May 2015, and in a warmer area in Europe. But they didn't make any significant changes, but plant replacement, whatever they lost.
And then with Central Park throughout the year, there's different kinds of plants that people like to put in their houses and also that get put into Central Park. So what kind of seasonal changes do you make?
Not a whole lot. It's basically a permanent design. It's a well thought out flow of different plants, different texture, different color for different areas. Some stay most of the time in the shade. And you can't really grow sun-loving flowers in the shade, can you? But we do some seasonal changes at the entrances where you come in. You can see some seasonal flowers, and seasonal meaning I can buy just about anything that's available wherever we are. Should it be Europe, or should it be United States or Florida, Caribbean? I can only get plants from the USA. They have to be US origin. And if they die or they start looking unacceptable, we just order a batch of seasonal flowers and live with that.
And then we oftentimes will get additional guests on board. Right now we've got a couple hundred birds that join us for the crossing. How does Central Park deal with these extra guests?
Yeah, they are welcome in Central Park. We don't chase birds here. We enjoy birds. We almost always have live birds in Central Park wherever we go. They don't live here, however. They come and go. Usually they stay for a day or two, then they leave. They don't nest here. They don't live here. We leave them alone. We don't bother the birds. They are free to fly around. Now we are in the middle of the ocean. It's unlikely they will go anywhere anytime soon. But it's not as many birds, not nearly as many as we started with beginning of this cruise.
One of the biggest things that people always worry about on a ship is fire. And for years they've done everything possible to try and reduce the amount of wood and flammable materials that are used on a ship. Obviously you can't replace trees with fake wood, so how do we deal with Central Park and the fire issue?
That's correct. We have some regulations because of the fire code here. We can only have a certain amount of trees in a single planter. We have to stay away from the balconies and glass that is not fireproof. We have to keep a certain distance. We have a fire break in Central Park that run through the entire park. It's a 10 feet wide path where there shouldn't be anything permanently stored that can catch on fire. We cannot let the plants or the trees grow in that fire break. That has to be a 10 feet clearance all the way through. And if they get just too bushy, it goes for trees and shrubbery also. We'll trim them back to a certain size. You can't just let them grow as they please. It was very carefully calculated what kind of fire load we can have here on deck 8, and they constructed a sprinkler system here that is somewhat different than the rest of the ship, and it's very efficient. From time to time we test it. It's just hard to comprehend what kind of dense fog it creates in seconds, but yes, wood can burn, plants can burn, and that's definitely a concern. So we have to comply with the rules and regulations.
And do you have a favorite spot in Central Park?
Yeah, actually, I am in my one of my favorite areas. Is due to the living wall, because that's a very elaborate structure, and we have to keep it in interesting condition. Not that the rest doesn't deserve it as much attention, but it's quite a piece. And I often wander here and admire it still today, after 6 months of creation.
And is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers?
Well, this is my third ship after Oasis and Allure of the Seas in the Oasis class line. And to me, it's more of an emotional issue. When you work with live material, you get emotionally attached to them, and for that reason I had a hard time leaving Oasis, where I spent most of the past 7 years, and it was a little bit difficult to say goodbye to all my children. But we keep building ships, and the fourth one is coming already. It should come out in 2018, and there's a chance I will be invited to participate in building it, and I believe we will continue building ships, and it's a wonderful idea. Central Park's been a tremendous success for the company. It became a logo for Royal Caribbean. It's an icon in the cruising industry. There's no other place in the world where you can see something like that, and I truly enjoy being part of it.
All right. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
So of course I want to thank Laszlo for taking the time to talk to me. He's one of those people that is really significant and historic to this company. He's kind of like the godfather of Central Park. He's been responsible for all 3 Central Parks that have been created up to this point, and he's been involved in them since the start and continued to be involved the entire time since they began. So he's really one of those big figures within the company, yet he's always around the ship. He's always in Central Park cleaning things up, doing his work, and people have no idea who he is, and yet he is one of these huge people with so much great information and knowledge about these ships and everything that goes on in Central Park. So if you're ever on board the Oasis, Allure, or the Harmony and happen to spot him in Central Park, be sure to stop by and say hi and ask him a couple questions about it, because he is the one that knows more than anybody else about these parks. So that about does it for another episode of the Cruise View. This is the end of the Halloween episode. Tomorrow, of course, once again, it's another sea day on our way to Fort Lauderdale. We're getting a little bit closer now, and we are in the warmer weather. Hopefully that will continue. But you have to check out tomorrow to find out. And once again, I am Picone. Stay tuned for the links.